Now, the good thing about any upheaval, any event where these Marxists showed their ugly heads like a pimple, there's other people who speak out against them also. And we have Dr. Owen Anderson, a man I have tremendous respect for. And he had the temerity and the guts, or as my Mexican friends would say, the cojones, to stand up against his own fellow teachers. So, Dr. Anderson, I commend you, and thank you for standing up.
Well, thanks for having me on, and it's been really an education for me to see how these professors have behaved themselves. And as a philosopher, I mean, I'm a professor, but I am very rare, I think, in not having the Marxist influence you mentioned. And although I'm a professor, I'm speaking here in my own opinions, not representing ASU. And I think that as a philosopher, I was shocked to see, wow, these are the kinds of arguments that honors professors are giving. This should be professors who know the best arguments and know how to persuade people. And instead, they immediately resort to insults, and they immediately resort to calling people names. And I've been asking them, hey, I'll debate you in public. I'll debate all of you at once if you want. Let's have an actual debate about these issues. And I haven't got any takers.
That gentleman there who said that all of the professors are Marxists and he wants to debate people and he can't find any takers. I just want to, if anybody wants to let him know, right? If he taker, it's right here. Let's do it. So I assume that the context of this is a pretty recent video. It's from late July. J. Andrew World found it in his in the dumpster diving through Rumble that he doesn't get paid nearly enough to put himself through for this show. So the context, as far as I can tell, is some kind of culture war kerfuffle. But what interests me much more than that is his claim that he is this rare academic who's not influenced by Marxism, and what he says next in the video.
And so what stands out to me is that when you say that there's this Marxist influence, they'll say, no, there isn't. I'm not a Marxist. It shows they don't know themselves, which you said. And they don't know the intellectual history and how influential Marx has been. Right. And so when you look at what they study, they teach everything exactly the way Marx would want them to teach it. And so if they don't realize that they're doing that, that should come up in their evaluations to say, you don't even realize the philosophy that shaped your whole thinking.
Yeah, and this kind of everybody is a Marxist, but they don't realize it thing has gotten really popular on the contemporary right, sort of going from, for example, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who a couple weeks ago was at a town hall event in New Hampshire, sponsored by a TV station in New Hampshire. And there was this lady at the town hall who asked him, hey, I hear you use this word woke all the time. What does that mean? And he says, woke is cultural Marxism. And the two all the way up through like what I have an article coming out in Jacobin probably in the next day or two about Yoram Hazony, who's a much better caliber of conservative thinker than Ron DeSantis, but nevertheless essentially does the same thing in his book from last year, Conservatism, A Rediscovery, where he says, well, the Marxist framework is this thing where you think that some people are oppressors and some of them are oppressed, and you need to try to do a revolutionary reconstitution of society and, to eliminate oppression. So all these people, even though they would deny being Marxists, like Professor Anderson just said in the video, really that's the framework underlying everything. To which I would say, well, hold on. Like, was Spartacus a Marxist? Like leading a slave revolt in ancient Rome, a couple thousand years before the birth of Karl Marx? I mean, he certainly seems to have believed that there were oppressors and people who were unjustly oppressed. How about the peasants who would like regularly rise in rebellions in feudal Europe? against medieval lords, were those Marxists? I mean, maybe you could say they didn't, believe that there was a possibility of a revolutionary reconstitution of society to end oppression. They just had, wanted some immediate alleviation of their complaints. So maybe that would disqualify them. But how about, for example, the people who stormed the Bastille in 1789? Were those Marxists? They certainly believed that some people were oppressed and some people were oppressing them, and they definitely believed in revolutionary reconstitution of society to try to end it. How about Mary Shelley, right? Mary Wollstonecraft, who 3 years after the storming of the Bastille, but also more than a quarter century before the birth of Karl Marx, wrote a book called Vindication of the Rights of Women, which is a early feminist tract, which is all about how women are systemically oppressed in the society that she exists in. I mean, I don't understand what the criteria is by which these like woke professors or whatever that have this guy so pissed off count as Marxists, and Mary Wollstonecraft wouldn't count as a Marxist, except perhaps that they lived after the birth of Karl Marx and she didn't. If that's a qualification for being a Marxist. Even specifically socialist complaints about capitalist society don't start with Marx. There's this socialism before Marx. Lots of socialists before Marx. I mean, going back to the last stages of the French Revolution, you have like Babeuf and the Conspiracy of Equals, are like basically early socialists up through, like all of the socialists that Marx cut his teeth criticizing at the beginning of his career. The idea that capitalism was unjust to workers and you should have, some sort of basic reconstitution of society to address that is not by any stretch of the imagination original to Marx. What's actually relatively unique about Marx and Marxism is this theory of history, this theory of how capitalism works and how you can overcome it. That according to Marx, you have the legal and political institutions of any given society are ultimately downstream of what he calls its relations of production. Do you have slave owners and slaves? Do you have lords and peasants? Do you have capitalists and workers? And those relations of production are themselves ultimately downstream of the level of development of the forces of production, the capacity of a society to produce stuff. And, Marx sees capitalism not as an avoidable moral mistake, but as the stage of historical development that advances the forces of production to the point where it creates the possibility of this generally shared abundance in the future. And look, agree with that, disagree with that, criticize it on all sorts of grounds. It's a good argument to have. Everybody will learn from it. But, just have some idea what you're talking about when you start to do that. I mean, that's look, Professor Anderson, I mean, you say you're desperate to debate people, so I assume we're going to have this conversation eventually. I mean, I know you wouldn't say that if you didn't mean it, that you wouldn't signal that level of willingness to talk to people, if you were, your door weren't truly open. So I assume we are going to have this conversation at some point. And before we do, I really hope you do some of this reading. So, you have a better and more specific idea of what Marxists actually think, and it's just going to make it a much better debate.
Yeah, I think one serious and one unserious point that comes to mind to me is I think, I think that they're kind of, these guys are often conflating maybe some decent critiques of like modern, let's say liberal or progressive culture with just this like super ridiculously expansive, just definition of Marxism that includes any kind of egalitarianism or restriction or rebuttal of hierarchy or criticism of hierarchy. They're trying to conflate that all into this kind of conspiratorial Marxist thing, like feminism or like don't be racist, those kinds of things. And then they often conflate it with criticisms that actually do kind of feel true, of like, I'm sure some people did. I wouldn't be surprised if some people did call him names instead of actually trying to debate him. You know what I mean? But that said, here's someone who's I don't think you're going to just call him names. I think you're going to have an honest debate with him. So I'm sure he's going to jump at the opportunity. And the other thing I wanted to say is, I like when he says that he'll debate all of them at once. It reminds me of like when like a chess grandmaster does like an exhibition of like 40 chess matches at the same time. He's just going to destroy like 40 libs at the same time on the
he's
stage.
just gonna go around. They're all gonna sputter out a sentence, and he'll just destroy them.
He just walks up to each picnic table with a chessboard and like hits
he's like I'm not even out of my preparation. I've already dominated you. So, but no, I would be interested to see you. I hope Rich Dad comes too.
Yes, please, by all means.
The Poor Dad isn't on the show, right?
No. I think it's just Rich Dad. I think I would assume that Poor Dad is the co-host, and he just didn't show up that day.
Poor Dad is actually his own father.
Oh, really?
Who's a Marxist who doesn't realize he's a Marxist.
There we go.
Oh, okay.
If you actually watch, it's actually said in the intro. It's quite incredible stuff.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.